Ever notice how ads always pop up at the worst moments? When the killer's identity is about to be revealed. During that perfect meditation flow. On Amazon Music, we believe in keeping you in the moment. That's why we've got millions of ad-free podcast episodes, so you can stay completely immersed in every story, every reveal, every breath. Download the Amazon Music app and start listening to your favorite podcasts ad-free, included with Prime.
Hey listeners, this is Peter, and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's conversation series episode is brought to you by thecollector.com. If you're into mind-blowing dives into ancient history, philosophy, killer art breakdowns, or even epic travel spots with a cultural twist, this is the site that's got it all. Visit thecollector.com. Stories to teach, inform, and inspire. Today on History Shorts, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Clare Jackson, Honorary Professor of Early Modern History at Trinity Hall, Cambridge, and a renowned expert on 17th century Britain. Clare joins us to discuss her latest book, The Mirror of Great Britain, A Life of King James VI and I, a captivating biography that brings to life one of history's most intriguing monarchs. Published just in time for the 400th anniversary of his death, this work explores James's ambitious vision for a unified Britain, his intellectual prowess, and the personal vulnerabilities that defined his reign. From religious tensions and political unions to court intrigues that echo in today's world. Whether you're a history buff or new to the era, Clare's insights promise to challenge what you thought you knew about the king behind his iconic Bible translation and the gunpowder plot. So settle in as we mirror the past with one of its finest chroniclers.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Clare, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what initially drew you to King James VI and I as a subject for a biography, and how does this book, The Mirror of Great Britain, aim to challenge or expand on existing perceptions of him as a monarch, really as like a buffoon in a sense? You know, how do you try to expand that or correct that?
I didn't set out meaning to write a biography of James, but when I published my previous book, Devilland, which came out in 2021, I was really struck by the number of people who said, among other things, it had really changed their image of James. He came over as a really competent, shrewd, multifaceted monarch. And I said, well, of course. But a lot of people just came back to me with this famous line in English history about, well, he slobbered at the mouth and had favourites. He was a bad king, which comes from this parody 1066 and all that was first published in 1930. And I sort of thought, well, you know, surely those views are kind of completely outdated. And then I read a book review that same year, 2021, in The Spectator that talked about him again in very similar terms as this sort of goggle-eyed, slobbering monarch. Then I realized that 2025 would be the 400th anniversary of his death. And anniversaries really matter to James. I mean, in the UK, we still celebrate Gunpowder Plot, or Gunpowder Treason Day, as it was known, every 5th of November when Guy Fawkes and his gunpowder plot was discovered. And that's over 400 years ago. And James himself made a good ritual of anniversaries. So the combination of thinking James is really interesting, well, of course he is, and 400th anniversary, I talked to my publishers and they were really interested. So I ended up writing it quite fast because once I had an unmovable deadline, like an anniversary. But then I realized I'd been thinking about James for years. I mean, my first lecture series at the University of Cambridge was called Early Modern Theories of Kingship, and it was about James. I'm really sad, I keep a file of jobs I didn't get, and I happened to be going through it, and I realized I'd proposed a whole final year course on James VI and I about 15 years ago. So I think at the back of my mind, I'd always been percolating. But this time, I think what I wanted to do was clearly redress those stereotypes about a buffoon who had favourites and spent all his time hunting. The one thing I also wanted to do was talk about James VI and I. So 6th of Scotland and 1st of England, because very often Historians of Scotland know a lot about James VI. He's king of Scotland for 40 years. He's crowned when he's only 13 months in 1567. And then he has at least 20 years ruling it as an adult king. But then he goes to London in 1603 when Elizabeth I dies. And that's usually when Scottish historians lose interest. Whereas English historians only ever sort of get interested in James as Elizabeth's successor. And they keep talking about him as this new king and this inexperienced king. And although it was a little ambitious, I just wanted to write a book that brought together James VI of Scotland and said, look, this is a very experienced monarch who is, as he put it, past middle age when he becomes King of England. And say to the English historians, we need to look at his Scottish experiences and say to the Scots, well, actually, he has a really interesting 22 years to go after he goes to England, and try and really think about James as king of both countries over his whole lifetime.
What would you say would be some of the lesser known aspects of his legacy that you highlight in the book, both as the sixth and the first?
One of them that I really tried to bring forward in the book was just his terrific engagement with print. So I try and use James's words a lot because he wrote on absolutely everything. He wrote on political theory, religious controversy. He drafted lots of proclamations. He wrote on witchcraft, on tobacco. He sort of brought together his collected works into this huge folio volume that almost set the precedent for Shakespeare then to publish his collected works in 1623. And just showing how deeply engaged James was in controversies across Europe. He wrote manuals of poetic theory. He wrote about rhetoric. He wrote about everything, one can almost imagine James had an interest in. And that sort of lively interest I really kind of wanted to convey. And I think I also just wanted to show what a physically energetic monarch he is. I mean, it's odd that we've got this sort of idea of being a buffoon who's quite lazy, because this is someone who actually spends almost half of most days out hunting. And while he's out hunting, he's doing political business all the time. He's talking to ambassadors. He's, meeting with courtiers. And I wanted to just try and get over this kind of bundle of energy.
In your research, what surprised you the most about his personal life? I mean, there is some controversy there as well about his sexuality and other things that have kind of come up over the years and centuries. But, talking about his relationships, intellectual pursuits, and vulnerabilities, is there anything about his personal life that kind of surprised you or stopped you in your tracks a little bit when you were doing this research?
No, I don't think I was surprised, but I think, again, what I wanted to try and do was redress the balance. I mean, we now have quite divided views about the relationship between sort of sexuality and identity, that you have to be of a particular kind of persuasion or inclination. And I think the early modern period is just very different in that sense. I mean, clearly James had physical relationships with men, but he also took his family life incredibly seriously as a king. He regarded it as his first and foremost duty to produce heirs. I mean, this was Elizabeth I's great failing. And, in some of the sort of more recent work on queer Shakespeare, it's often been said that just because one can acknowledge queer Shakespeare, that doesn't mean erasing his wife and family. And I think exactly the same applies to James. Again, James's ability to spin so many plates simultaneously, when you actually think what he sometimes did. But the book is constructed thematically to try and bring together his Scottish and his English experiences, and there were reasons for that. But just occasionally, when I sort of step back and put on my little chronological lens and think, what, he did all that in one day? That sometimes surprised me.
You talk about in the book about his ambitions and really challenges that he faced in unifying these kingdoms. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, I think James thought this was just a terrific opportunity, that Scotland and England had been countries that had been at war for centuries, natural enemies. England would find itself sort of sandwiched between France and Scotland, that had this traditional old alliance, this medieval friendship. So surely, usually when one early modern monarch acquires more territory, that just means a bigger territory. So I think James thought it was pretty self-evident that on his accession to the English throne, creation of a new Great Britain, uniting this island that was united already by land, and it was an island, and it spoke a very similar language in Scotland and England. They were both Protestant. There were all these reasons why it looked like it made sense. And I think he was very surprised that the English immediately became hostile and started worrying about whether or not creation of a new country called Great Britain would invalidate any laws made under the name of England and all the rest of it. And in a way, that did make me rethink. To the English, clearly the crisis is Elizabeth and when she dies, and this kind of vacuum. James comes south from Edinburgh, sets up court, and then to the English, the crisis has passed. Whereas James comes down and thinks this is some wonderful big opportunity. And I think like a little bit like the King James Bible, where he tosses out the idea of a new translation and lots of companies get to work immediately. And 7 years later, the King James Version is published. I think James thought all he had to do really was set up a union commission. Everyone would embrace it as an obvious way forward. They'd look at legal union, economic union, religious union. Whereas instead the English said, we really don't like this idea. The Scots were not particularly keen because they just felt they were going to come off second best. And the idea sort of gently withered.
The holidays always remind me of the year I was scrambling for the perfect gift and ended up discovering how effortless great hosting and great gifting can be. From unforgettable presents to stress-free entertaining, Omaha Steaks delivers the world's best steak experience. I love gifting Omaha Steaks because the quality is unbeatable. USDA certified tender steaks, premium proteins, elegant sides, and indulgent desserts. Every box I've ordered has arrived perfectly packed, and everyone I've gifted it to has raved about the flavor and variety. With 5 generations of expertise, Omaha Steaks makes holiday magic easy, delicious, and guaranteed. Save big on gourmet gifts and more holiday favorites with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com. And for an extra $35 off, use code FLAVOR at checkout. Terms apply. See site for details. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code FLAVOR.
What would you say is James's legacy? I mean, dividing him between the sixth and the first, which one do you think becomes or gets to the foreground of his legacy?
It probably depends where you're looking at. I mean, if you're in the north of Ireland, his creation of the Ulster Plantation, which was a Protestant community filling a vacuum created by Gaelic local chiefs. I mean, the creation of the Ulster Plantation and many of the sort of geopolitical and sectarian problems, I mean, that's a problematic legacy. I think if you're looking at it from Virginia and Jamestown, I mean, he was the one who eventually took Virginia as a crown colony and established what was really quite a fledgling settlement at that time. So quite locally, those might be the kind of legacies. I think much more widely, it probably has to be the King James Bible. I mean, this is certainly in the US, that was the largest selling English translation of the Bible until the 1980s. It's been the most popular English translation sort of ever. That's what the spacemen on Apollo were broadcasting in 1968. And that diction and syntax, I mean, obviously James did not write that, but it's become sort of synonymous with that Jacobean language and his patronage of writers as well, sort of Shakespeare and Donne, and that sort of wonderful moment in English literature too. I think restoring the king back into that is one of the things I also tried to do in the book.
I think that people don't give him enough credit for the efforts to navigate through religious tension, political unions, court intrigues, all these things that this man had to wear different hats through. And I feel like your book definitely showcases that. Can you maybe elaborate on one or two of these things where he had to be a different person to different groups of people?
Absolutely. And another legacy is even our national flag. I mean, the Union Jack is named after James himself. But James is very good at, well, either keeping lots of people on board, or you might more negatively say telling different sets of people what they wanted to hear. He becomes very skilled in it as King of Scotland because the Scottish crown is not particularly powerful. It's really quite a weak crown, and his survival depends on keeping lots of different factions sort of in mutual sort of either antagonism or respect with one another. And part of his success in defending his right to succeed Elizabeth I, because nobody knows what's going to happen in England when Elizabeth dies, is because he can keep Protestant states and Catholic states on board. He is, after all, the son of Mary Queen of Scots, who'd been executed on Elizabeth I's orders, and there's a lot of Catholic desire to reassert Catholic power on Elizabeth's death, but James manages successfully to reassure Catholic states that he's not going to be a great persecuting monarch. His wife, Anna of Denmark, starts out as a Lutheran, but covertly converts to Catholicism. And his ability really throughout his Scottish and English reigns to steer a middle path, to try and take the aspects of extreme Puritanism or Scots Presbyterianism, the emphasis on the word and the Bible and sermons, to try and take that, but also to then marry that with Episcopalian sort of hierarchies, and also to try and talk about one true church and to keep the idea of the reunification of Christendom at the forefront of people's minds. I mean, James, I think, is genuinely distressed that Protestants and Catholics wage such vicious, bloody war on each other when, as he sees, the greater threat might be the Ottoman Turk or even sort of irreligion, sort of people losing faith in religion.
Would you say there's any parallels between his efforts to navigate all these different intrigues and hold these unions together to contemporary issues, even Britain or beyond?
Yeah, I think one of the things I wanted to do in the book was to sort of say, James really tried to give the idea of Britain, Great Britain, sort of psychological heft. I mean, it's partly national security. He just says it is better being together, but also that you then have to create a sort of British discourse and try and lose forms of division. I mean, that was very James. And that was very different, to the way in which in recent debates in Britain, when we often sort of things like Brexit, leaving the EU, it wasn't really, the debate there wasn't so much in terms of the positive notion of European Union after the trauma of the Second World War, but much more, how much is this costing us? And James is very clear-eyed about, if you now want to break that link between England and Scotland that I have done so much to bring together and bring peace, this will be expensive, and this will be, this will be very, very disruptive. So I think what I wanted to try and do was say, James, I think, appreciated the complexity. He felt it was really important that we share geopolitical borders with stable allies. And all of that is very prescient today. And at a time when advocating peace could sometimes be derided, and he was sometimes mocked as not being sufficiently manly or leading great armies. I mean, James knew that he didn't have the money to sort of deploy great armies on the continent in what we now think of as the 30 Years' War, but he also just didn't think that war was resolved by pitched battle. It was always, he felt, by diplomacy and by peacemaking. So, I think there are real moments of resonance that make it worth going back 400 years and revisiting James.
What do you think was the most challenging part of this entire research process?
The most challenging practical bit was simply both the sort of the terror and the discipline of having an unmovable deadline of an anniversary. The book was longer than it was originally contracted to be, and one of the most sort of frustrating bits was all the parts I had to leave and not really cover, just because I had to keep it as a manageable length. And there were lots of ways in which James sponsored global diplomatic efforts to Japan and to Mughal India. There were also lots of initiatives in the Gaeltacht in Scotland, but I tried to keep James as present as possible. There were lots of interesting avenues I could have gone down, but then I think you would have begun to lose the sort of focus on James. So the bits that got left on the cutting room floor were maybe the bits I might go back and work in different ways.
Yeah, I was going to suggest maybe that could be articles. You could look into them as articles because you did the research, so it's there. It's always so hard cutting things. I'll write an article that's 5,000 words, and publisher will come back and be like, it needs to be 3,000. I'm like, that's almost half. And then you're like, like everything's important because I wrote it. We put so much time into these words, not on the page, I guess on the screen, that it kind of hurts to cut these out. And then how do you decide what to cut out?
Well, I have to say, in this instance, I had a most amazing editor at Norton, Liveright. And Haley, my editor, Haley Bracken, had no compunction about saying, I think this is superfluous. And yeah, I fully respected that. And I think actually having that kind of external eye is so important.
Yes, 100%. Claire, what are you working on next?
I don't know, to be completely honest. I didn't, as I say, plan to write another big book so quickly after Devilland. There are lots of things I want to work on, but right now I'm just doing some short essays. There's a book coming out next year on one of James's diplomats in Venice, and I'm writing a review essay on it before it comes out. It's by Carol Rotter, about Henry Wotton. So I'm going to write some short pieces and take some time to think about the next big project. And
where can my listeners go to learn more about your work?
They can read The Mirror of Great Britain, or they can listen to it. There's an Audible version as well. Films that I made with the BBC are often shown again on PBS, The Stuarts and The Stuarts in Exile. Devilland is available as an Audible and as a paperback. That was the book It's called Devil Land, England Under Siege, 1588 to 1688. And it's really, well, the clue is in the title. Devil Land was a name that a Dutch pamphleteer gave to England in the 17th century. It's just regarded as I say in the book, Europe's adventure playground. I've also written a small book on Charles II. So yeah, there's quite a lot out there. There's also a lot of episodes of In Our Time on my website, which I've sometimes done with Melvyn Bragg. It's a discussion program on the BBC here in the UK.
Awesome. And what is your website?
ClareJackson.com, I think.
But that's this last question. You have so many books behind you. What 2 books would I definitely find on that bookshelf?
Ooh, and they are real books. As somebody asked me the other day on a Zoom, are those real books? I was like, yes, they're real books. Oh, well, they're arranged by subject. There's a lot of history. There's the whole of Pepys's diary, which I reread when I was on maternity leave, which was just a terrific read if you want to get right into the 1660s. And there's also a lot of political theory, the book that blew my mind when I was an undergraduate, Rousseau's Discourse on Inequality. There's various editions of that there.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I truly appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
For past episodes in the conversation series, visit www.historyshortspodcast.com. You could also find History Shorts on Facebook or X. And if you like the show, please consider becoming a monthly Patreon supporter at patreon.com/History Shorts Podcast.
Hey guys, finding the perfect gift for the food lover in your life is easy, thanks to Goldbelly. Goldbelly ships America's most iconic foods, straight from world-famous restaurants right to your door. So if you want to treat someone to Joe's Stone Crab from Miami, Franklin Barbecue from Texas, or desserts from famous foodies like Ina Garten or Martha Stewart, Goldbelly has you covered. Just go to goldbelly.com and for a limited time, get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT. That's promo code GIFT.